So we've been going through the book of John, and the book of John is the last of the four Gospels to be written. And one of the things we've said is as you look at the book of John, there's just this sense of movement. That everything Jesus said and did, he was moving towards this conclusion. And he often spoke about this conclusion being called the hour. So we're just going to do some setup to where it got us here today as we're going through John. And so Jesus, in his third year of his earthly ministry, he enters Jerusalem during Passover week on a donkey. And the hour had come. And it's kind of very cool. Now we know on this side of the cross that hour, that week in Jerusalem, that it would culminate with his death on the cross on the coming Friday. And we know on this side of the cross that the resurrection would follow 3 days later. But I think as we read through this, we have to understand that the disciples, they hadn't really figured out what everything Jesus was trying to tell them. And most of the time, and I hope you've picked up on this, and Spencer said it a couple weeks ago, if you've heard it once, you've probably heard it so much that you're almost getting sick of it, but this is why. They didn't get it because everybody who heard the words of Jesus, even his disciples, his closest friends, they had this idea of what he was going to do, of what he should look like, that they had an actual agenda. And so, since Jesus, what he was telling them didn't fit into what they thought the Messiah would do, they just didn't get it quite often. And so, all this to get to this. That Friday, hours before he would be arrested on that Friday, and the events would kick off that you guys should be familiar with, that he would be arrested and he would be drugged all around Jerusalem, that he'd be beaten, he would be tortured, and then he would be killed. Hours before that happened, Jesus sat down for this ceremonial, traditional Passover meal. We call it the Last Supper because, again, on this side of the cross, that's what it was. And Jesus, again, not for the first time, and this is what gets us, right? Not for the first time, Jesus tells them, he goes, I'm not going to be with you guys much longer. And they didn't ever seem to get this thing. But he goes, I'm going to be leaving you. And so the rest of John is simply, until it gets to the cross, it's a couple chapters, is simply going to be Jesus sitting down with the disciples, with the knowledge that in a few hours, he's not going to be with them. And he's preparing them for what's going to come next. And so one of the things I want us to understand is that what came next in a very real way is us. I want you guys to get that. That when Jesus is sitting down, he has his full understanding that he is leaving the disciples, that he is going to go, he's going to die, he understands what's going to happen, and so he's preparing them for what's going to come next. And what came next after the events of the crucifixion and the resurrection, what's us? What came next is the church. And so as he's sharing this stuff, he's not just talking to them, he's talking to us also. And the first thing he talked to them about was in response to their reaction to this news that he would be leaving them. And we talked about this last week. Spencer, 2 weeks ago, he talked about the ceremonial foot washing, what that was about. I talked last week about when he told Judas, he said, get up and go do what you're going to do. And we looked at that maybe from a different perspective. But now, in response to that, he actually says to them, in response to their feelings about him saying he's leaving, he says this, and so it's John 14:1-3. He says, let your heart not be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. It also says many rooms, another translation. If it were not so, I would have told you, for I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you myself. That is where I am. There you may be also. Now, I'm really familiar with this verse because I've attended a lot of funerals growing up. And a lot of funerals have this as a going away verse. They say that he's went ahead, he's preparing a place, he's coming back, and I've heard it a lot, but I don't think I've ever heard it actually explained. You see, this verse, this statement that Jesus just made, it's actually about marriage. Whoa. This is actually about marriage when he says, I'm going to prepare a room for you, and in my Father's house there are many rooms. You see, I think, well, when we would say, man, I don't know, is that about marriage? That's kind of a shock I want you to understand that the disciples certainly understood exactly what he's talking about. That these Jewish individuals, they understood exactly what he's talking about. One of the things we've tried to do at LifePoint, and it's one thing I always want us to remember, hold each other accountable to this, hold me accountable as I teach, is that Jesus was actually a Jewish man in the first century speaking to a Jewish audience. And I've said to you guys that a culture is not defined so much by what we talk about, even today. A culture is defined by those things we don't have to talk about. That when I say it to you, you already get it. It comes with the weight of a lifetime of having seen it, having heard it. It's not defined by having to explain everything that we already know. So they would have understood what Jesus was saying in this thing. It's about marriage. You see, in that culture, when a young Jewish man would propose, however that would work, to his wife to become engaged, what he would often do would head home to where? Take a guess. To his father's house. He would head home. You see, we live in this world where the first thing we do when we get married is we shove our kids out, right? Like, you can't be here anymore, you gotta go. Well, that was not a first century Jewish thing. In fact, just the opposite in most cases, that this young Jewish man, when he had his bride and they were engaged to be married, this betrothment period, he would go to his father's house and he would prepare a room for her. And most often that actually meant building another wing to the house, building a suite of rooms necessarily. He would go there and prepare it. Now, at the end of that, when the rooms were complete, what would the groom go do? He'd get his bride. When those rooms were complete, he would actually go, he would get married, and that's where they would go. And I want you to understand that this was the metaphor that Jesus chose. And when you get that, when you understand that as he's talking, that he just told his disciples, I'm leaving you. And he sees in their hearts, in their eyes, this trouble. You can't. In fact, I skipped some stuff that we'll go back later and talk about, where they're saying, I want to go with you. And he's saying, where I'm going, you cannot go. And then to comfort them, what he says is this, though. He goes, man, I'm coming back to you. I'm like a groom. I'm a groom. I'm going to my Father's house, and I'm going to prepare a place for you. So much of this stuff opens up when you think about this metaphor that he chose, because I want you to get this. I'm married. 31 years ago, I asked my wife to marry me, and I can tell you that if I was at home building a room, first of all, we would have to have help because I don't build, but I can say that I would have been excited. That I would have been excited. Jesus is talking about this groom. He's excited to bring the bride home, the faithfulness of the groom, his joy, his anticipation to do what? To show his bride what he had prepared for her. And I want you guys to think about this. This is not the point of the message. This is just the metaphor he chose. If that's true, I want you to understand, as Jesus is creating stuff, this excitement to show his bride what he's created just for her. So Jesus is telling them. He's telling us that marriage, the way I feel for my wife, and I want you guys to think about that, that he's saying, Jesus chose this metaphor to say that marriage, the way that I feel for my wife and that I hope she feels about me, well, marriage is a gift intended to demonstrate in a way that I cannot miss the way that Jesus feels for us. Think about that for a second. That a marriage, the way that it's this divine marriage is this divine experiment taught to teach us so much, but it's actually also given to us so that we understand the way that Christ, that God feels for me and he feels for you. And so, why did he tell them this? Jesus told them this in response to them being troubled. So for years growing up, I always had older people say to me things like this, oh, Jesus, come quickly. And I'd get so mad at them, right? I was like, listen, you're old, right? It's easy for you to say, you're old. Can I just get married, right? Can I just have kids? Can I just do all the fun stuff before you take me to heaven, right? Really, that's kind of the way I felt about it. But Jesus is actually telling them here, he says, man, that the way that you should feel when your heart is troubled is to hold on to the knowledge of his passion for us. He's telling his disciples, as he's going to the cross, he's saying, man, the way to fight that your heart is troubled is you need to understand something. I am passionate about you. I am a groom, and I will always come back to you. And what's amazing is this, that the word used here for troubled is actually, let me back up. There was a pool of Bethesda that, if you recall, Jesus actually healed a man, a lame man. The guy had actually been hanging out by the pool, but nobody would take him down there because when the waters were stirred up, that they thought that the angel's wings had touched it and that healing would take place. So the word stirred up. The word stirred up when talking about the pool of Bethesda is the same word that Jesus used here that is translated as troubled. So let's look at what he's actually saying. He's actually saying that whenever, and now since we've already established that him talking to them is also him talking to us, what Jesus is saying to them and to us is that whenever your heart is stirred up, think about that. How often lately that our hearts get stirred up. In fact, another way that's translated is all mixed up. I want to ask you guys this. How often over the past couple years has your heart been mixed up? It's just been pulled in this direction and that direction and this direction, stirred up with anger, stirred up with hatred, stirred up with confusion. Jesus is saying that whenever your heart is stirred up, all mixed up, he said this to his disciples and therefore said it to us. He said, remember this. Cling to this knowledge of the promise of his passion for you and me. And it's weird out here because I'm not used to talking out here like this, and I'm kind of distracted myself, and I don't know if my voice is carrying over there, and I don't know. So I just want to say that again because I mean this. Jesus is telling his disciples in that upper room where they have finally begun to realize the knowledge of what's going to happen, that he's going to leave them. He says, I am like a groom. I am preparing a place for you, but I will always come back for you. I will always, I cannot not because of the passion I have for you. And he says that when your heart is stirred up as a believer, when your heart is all mixed up like the water at Bethesda, when that happens and you don't know what else to cling to, you don't know how to respond to the latest thing you don't agree with, you don't know how to respond to the absolute absurdity of a world that says evil is good and good is evil. You don't know how to do that and your heart is stirred up violently. Jesus is telling them and telling us, cling to the promise of two things. He is passionate for us and he is always coming back for us. See, I don't think we talk about that enough, and I think a lot of it is because we don't talk enough about heaven. And I'm going to do a little series on heaven in just a little bit, because one of the things that I've thought about is whenever we book a flight somewhere or a holiday somewhere or we're going to go somewhere, the first thing we do is we go online and we Google what it's going to look like. And we get excited about this, and yet we never think about what the Bible has really revealed about this place, that Jesus is preparing for us like a groom, so excited with everything he's doing, excited for the day he's going to get us and show us what he's done. So I just want to spend a little time, maybe coming up next couple weeks, I don't know how or when, but I think it's important for us to talk about heaven as a real place and not something that would be a cheap substitute for the things I can get here like I always felt growing up. So he's telling us this also. He's telling us here and telling his disciples that eternity is real. I just want that to hit you guys for a second. I want you guys to understand that eternity is real. That's an absolute reality. It's as real as, and I'll give you the very first thing. I'll give you the very first thing about heaven right now. It's as real as this, that we will be able to do this, right? You guys get that? That we will do this for all of eternity. In fact, Michelle, you got me nervous. I heard rustling. Who was here for that weasel? You guys weren't here for the weasel? Okay, I don't know if this is going tape. All I can tell you is, okay, last time we were here, there was like a little a shrew that came running out right toward Michelle, right over there we're all eating. And Michelle's like, is that a shrew? And then popped up right from behind was a weasel. And it was only about this big. And it was the coolest looking funny thing that I just saw it take off running on its back legs. And it got to the shrew, and Michelle's like, oh, 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 what's that? And then it grabbed the shrew. Yeah, and the sounds that little shrew made as it got drugged back. Right in front of us, we saw the circle of life, right? And all I can tell you is, one day we may see that shrew again. Because heaven is real. We won't see that in heaven, I don't think. I think that's the stuff we won't see. But we'll actually be able to do this, and we're going to laugh. And he's saying that eternity is real, he tells his disciples. And he says he's coming one day. He's coming back one day to take his bride home. And he's excited for that day when he will show us for the first time what he built. And I want you guys to get this, and I don't know if I can do it. So just the Holy Spirit has to get this. This is not that he built for us. I believe he built for you. That I really mean that he is absolutely preparing a place with you in mind. That he's literally got me in mind, and he's thinking, man, I can't wait for Dawn to get here. I can't wait. Yes! I get to show him like a groom with his bride, this home that I've made for him. In fact, I was thinking about this. Maybe you don't know this. So two things. We always say this, that God is what? God is. Apparently we don't always say that. From here on out, we're always going to say it, okay? We always say God is. You know what else is God, though? He creates. By his very nature, God creates. He creates everything, and I think it's no coincidence. And I thought about this today that, man, how cool is it that his son came as a carpenter, right? That even here he was building, and he's still continuing to build for us today this home, and this is when it gets heavy. I told Michelle, I think it was today, I said, I don't know, maybe the messages I give are too demanding because I just can't escape this fact that it always hits on a heavy spot. But I'll say this. He's still building, he's still creating today the home, he told his disciples, that's where he went, that awaits his bride. And this is where I need to say this, and I've said this for 20 years since I've been blessed to teach. I never want to create insecurity in anybody where there should be none. Does that make sense? I never want anybody to leave thinking, oh man, I thought I was okay with God and Jesus, and now I don't know, if there should have been none. But I can tell you what I fear even more as a pastor. I fear even more creating a sense of security within people where there shouldn't be any. Does that make sense? That I fear much more. I would rather come face to face with Jesus, and he goes, man, you kind of cause some people to question some stuff, but enter on in and you can apologize to them in person and laugh about it. I'd much rather that happen than he would say, you know all those people you convinced were coming? Because of the things you said, they didn't make it. And so with that, I want to say again, who is Jesus coming back for? His bride. He's coming back for his bride, and I just know this. As a pastor, I go to a lot of weddings. And they're beautiful. And up there at the wedding party, in no particular order, you can see with the groomsmen over here, right? They're dressed the same way as the groom. And over here you can see the bridesmaids, and they're dressed much the same. They're all dressed up for everything, and you can look, and there's a pastor. I'm standing right behind the bride, right? Right, Colton? We're right there with them. We're as close as you can get. We get to see in their eyes what's happening. I get to look out there and I see all the family members. I see grandparents. I see all of those people. I see family and I see friends. But how many brides are there at that wedding? I want you to think about that. There's only one bride at a wedding. And I said this 31 years ago in March. I waited at the end of an aisle for my bride to walk towards me. Puffy sleeves, headband, big train, right? I waited, right? Lots of hair. I waited for her, and do you know who I was looking at the whole time? Her. That's it. I want you guys to get that. As my bride was coming toward me, I wasn't concerned with anything else other than my bride. I only had eyes for my bride. And at the end of all the party, at the end of everybody else dancing and celebrating and enjoying and feeling the warmth and the love of that day and the commitment we'd made to each other and all the stuff that was just emanating from us, the only person I left with that night was my bride. I can't hit on this enough because, and I wrote this down the exact way I want to say it. So here's how I'm going to say it. You see, I live with the burden that many people who are in the wedding party have become convinced they're the bride. I live with the burden that in this wedding party we're talking about, where Christ is the groom, where his people are the bride, I live with the burden that people who are close to the bride, who look like the bride, who feel the warmth of the connection with the bride, I live with the burden that many of those, maybe some of us, we have convinced ourselves that we are actually the bride. And I think of churches, and I hope you get the metaphor I'm going with, that we can go on Sundays or Saturdays and we can get the songs and we can feel good and we can get this pseudo-spiritual feeling about how awesome this is. We can even say it is so great that God, He loves all of us and this is so amazing. And we can convince ourselves because we are close to the bride as church, that we're getting the spillover, like in the wedding party. We can convince ourselves that Christ is coming back for us because we are the bride. But what if that's not true? What if we're just in the wedding party? What if we're just the ones who've been around it enough that we feel the excitement of it? We feel the love of it. We love the songs. We love whatever. But what if we're not the bride? It's important to know because I hope when Michelle was coming down that aisle 31 years ago that she only had eyes for her groom. I hope that when she was coming down that she was locked on me and I was locked on her and everything else was superfluous. Everybody else might have thought they were a part of it. And we want them to be a part of it. That's kind of cool at a wedding, right? But at the end of the day, the groom, me, and the bride, her, we were leaving everybody else regardless of how warm and fuzzy they felt about that evening. And I live with the burden that especially in the Western world where there is no commitment really required to be a part of this thing, that it's becoming less and less an issue of having to sell out to be in it, that you can come, and I mean us, can we just say us, right? Not anywhere else. I want to make sure that those of you who come to Life Point, that you don't get caught up so much in the idea, or the feeling and the vibe of the words and the feeling of this song that Spencer does amazing and that everything is so cool that you go, oh, I must be a part of this because I feel good, and yet you have never made the commitment to be the bride. Man, that is a burden I live with because Jesus is telling us this, and this is where the rubber hits the road. We're all going to do a little self-check, myself included as I was doing this. Jesus is telling us, and He told His disciples in this beginning of really what is like chapters that John gives us, that Jesus was preparing them from His leaving them. Jesus is telling them and therefore telling us that when our hearts are all troubled, and again that word means what? Stirred up. And I want you to consider this. I mean really, it's a beautiful setting. This should be relaxing. When your hearts over the past year, week, month, days, when your heart has become stirred up, has become all mixed up with confusion and anxiety and all the things that right now this world seems to be throwing at us, where good is called evil and evil is called good, and when your heart is all stirred up, Jesus is saying that what we focus our eyes on reveals our place in the wedding party. I want you to think about that. He's saying that in the middle of all this, when your heart is stirred up, what you focus your eyes on reveals your relationship in that wedding party. Are we the bride? I would ask you, and this is for you guys. When your hearts have been stirred up, when your hearts have been mixed up, is the first thing you go to, is your default, and maybe not your default, but your chosen action. Do you guys get that? That you're like, I'm going to do this. I don't want to, but I am. Is your default, is your decision when your heart is stirred up to focus on Christ? That's a hard one, isn't it? Is that where you go? Is that what you turn to? Because if not, if we don't focus on Him like He is focused on us, like my wife focused on me as the groom when I came down the aisle, if she started looking at everything else around and going, I don't know, that groomsman's pretty good looking. I don't know it. I hope everybody's thinking about me today because I think I look pretty awesome. If her eyes were focused on something else, it would reveal, would it not, where her heart is at towards me? So, are we just in the wedding? Are we just at the wedding? Are we all just dressed the same, feeling the warmth of the love? But our eyes focus on something other than the groom? Because I can tell you this, Jesus is saying that the bride does not. Can we all agree? And I mean that. And I'm not just saying like a pastor. Can we all get amen? Can we all agree that if this is the metaphor He intentionally talked about, was He is a groom going somewhere to prepare a room for His wife to come to, and that we are His wife, can we not then say that the wife's eyes, the groom's eyes, the bride should be focused on the groom? Isn't that what we should say? There's this salacious story in Scripture. Oh, it's salacious. It's sensational. I've said this before. Colton, don't report me to the pastors' union what I'm going to say, okay? The guild, we represent, no, the other one, right? It says things like this, and I apologize to the children that are present. The salacious story says things like, her neck was like an ivory tower. Oh, did you just hear that? I do believe I got the vapors. Did you just hear? The Song of Solomon, right? The Song of Solomon is written this beautiful Hebrew poetry that's not talking about rhythm. It doesn't have rhyme to it. It has feelings. It has thoughts that are based upon feelings. And one of the things it says in this beautiful love story in the Old Testament that I believe that you have to be like of a certain age to even read as a Jewish individual. It's so salacious, they don't want the passion stirred up so much, right? It says in this beautiful love story that honestly has some of the most personal imagery regarding the marriage, the relationship between God and His people. Do you know what it says that the Solomon's bride's eyes were like? Do you know what it said? You know what? Free burger for you if you haven't already had one. He says she's got dove eyes. So when he's talking about this, and I want you to think about this for a minute. When in this beautiful story that is in there to represent in so many ways this beautiful intimacy between God and us, the church. He says she's got dove eyes. And do you know what's unique to a dove's eyes? And don't say it out loud. It was hypothetical. Let me teach. Do you know a dove does not have peripheral vision? When a dove focuses on something, you know what the dove can see? Only that it focuses on. Only that. And he says that his bride's eyes are like doves, and they have no peripheral vision, and that's the defining trait of the bride. And I want you guys to get that. The defining trait of the bride is that they only see what they're looking at, and they're focused on the groom. So all of that to get to this little song. I'm going to sing a spiritual. You ready? One of the spirituals that the slaves would sing when they were enslaved, as the lot of slaves, they would actually come up with these songs about their deliverance, right? You guys are familiar. And what was the song, this beautiful song that they would sing as they're working in the fields? They would say what? Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home, right? Okay. I want you guys to ask yourself when you listen to that song, and I mean it, because in their troubles, and think about this, in their troubles, and all the stuff they were thinking about, they knew their deliverance came from God. And verse after verse, My eyes looked upon the hills. Where does my deliverance come from? My eyes saw the Lord. He's our deliverance. We are the bride. Where should our eyes, with no peripheral vision, where should we, when our hearts are troubled, when our hearts are stirred, where should we look? At the groom. Right at Jesus, who said, I am the groom, you are my bride. I want to ask you, if you were making this, and be very real with yourself, and don't answer it, but would it be something like this? If I were to sing that song today, or you were to sing that song in the middle of our hearts being stirred up, would we say something like this? Swing low, sweet political party of my preference. Coming forward to carry me home. I'm serious. When your heart is troubled, when your heart is stirred up, when your heart is mixed up, how many of you, your eyes would not go, Jesus, you are God, you are my deliverer, you're my hope, you're my salvation, and the fact that your passion is so great for me that you will never leave me, that you are coming back for me, that gives me a base to stand on in the middle of all this. Instead of that, how many of you go, oh, but swing low, sweet greater paycheck, swing low, my children's athletics and their being okay, swing low, my health of my bride and myself, coming forward to carry me home, right? Because I'm here to tell you guys, the very defining trait of the bride of Christ is that the bride is looking at the groom all the time. And so I'm pretty much done, except to give you another Old Testament verse. It says in the Old Testament where God, again, said time and time again that Israel was his bride and that she had turned a harlot on him by turning to other things. Time and time again, and it says this, cisterns were these things that they would create. They would hewn out of a rock and they would collect water, right? Cisterns of living water is what he called them. One of the prophets said, man, you've done two things. Not only have you neglected God, the cistern of living water, you've turned away from that, but you actually you've turned to broken cisterns, which can hold no water. And that was the greatest sin he could talk about, because the eyes had left the groom. That's all I got. I'll say it again, though. I live with the burden that that we make things, and I'll just speak very freely to you guys, and this is not in my script, this is just from me to you. I live with the burden that we do so much to make sure that our churches are comfortable for people, right? We do so much to make sure that we have the right programming for people. We do so much to make sure that the budgets are made so we can continue to make sure we have so much stuff for people, that they're so comfortable for people, that we actually create people who think they're the bride, but they've never made the commitment. They're simply close enough to the bride to feel the warmth. And so I'll say this again because I hope it hits home tonight, and I hope you guys get this. Jesus Christ said to his disciples, do not be troubled. Believe this, as you believe in God, believe in me. I am leaving to create a place for you to live with me for all eternity. And I am coming back to get you. And anytime you are troubled, cling to that understanding of the passion and the commitment and the promise I've made to you. And if that is not what we cling to, and we find ourselves clinging to something else for momentary comfort, I need you to understand again, Christ is coming back for his bride, not the entire wedding party.